Hello, thank you so much for clicking on this module to learn more about social and emotional learning, connecting mind, body, and spirit. We knew that when we created Mindfulness and Money, we couldn't talk about financial literacy without taking into consideration mental health and wellness. For a lot of us growing up, some of these topics that we discuss, like core values and mental wellness and journaling and mindfulness, weren't necessarily available to us when we were younger. And we wish we would have heard about them, and we wish that they would have been normalized. And so that's why we included Ajani in this module, because he has a really interesting and unique story and showcases the ebbs and flows of personal growth. And he's someone that I've learned a lot from, and someone that I hope you can learn a lot from too. That's why we created Mindfulness and Money, to have these conversations and to normalize these conversations so that everyone can implement them in their everyday lives and everyone can feel like they're in control and have the tools to do so. I think it would be helpful to define what mindfulness is to you and just kind of get everyone on the same page in that realm.
To me, mindfulness is basically present moment awareness. And in relation to finances, managing money, I think the two forms of intelligence that are needed are emotional intelligence and financial intelligence. And emotional intelligence can be cultivated through mindfulness. And it's the understanding of one's emotions, the emotions of others, and using one's emotion in adaptive ways instead of being controlled by one's emotions. Financial intelligence, which is an understanding of how money is used in business, in personal finance, and in the stock market, is incredibly important in regards to managing money. The combination of those two forms of intelligence is what I believe youth and the vast majority of people need to manage their finances effectively.
When people think about financial literacy, they just think about like the core financial concepts, investing and saving, and those things, as you've mentioned, are really important. But being mindful of our habits, of our core values, and being mindful of our emotions is just as important as well. What I think I've learned a lot from you is that you've gone through this journey of kind of exploring mindfulness and meditation and journaling and various practices that you use to just be aware of yourself, more aware of your core values and what you want to do in your life. Do you think you could kind of explain what your journey has been?
Basically, in 2014, I had an existential crisis, and I realized that the trajectory of my life, although it included a lot of positive things and a career path that I was passionate about, many of my habits and relationships were unhealthy and were sabotaging the trajectory that I was on. I realized that the environments that I was in, the relationships that I was in, were a reflection of who I was at the time. I came to a point whereby I had to make a decision. Am I going to keep going down this same path, which is undoubtedly going to become more painful and confusing, or am I going to find a new path? So I started to replace certain habits, environments, and relationships with new habits, environments, and relationships. And some of the habits that I adopted included different forms of meditation, different forms of yoga, journaling. I started joining different communities that focused on mindfulness and introspection. I started practicing and learning from different meditation teachers, Buddhist monks, Vedic monks, etc. I started consuming a lot of books on personal development, introspection, and mindfulness. And I started to shift the trajectory that I was on. My career path still remained the same, but it was as if the different pieces that contributed to that career path and the other aspects of my life were changing in a way that was more positive. I still struggle from time to time. I still regress. I still act in ways that are reminiscent of 2014 and earlier. But generally speaking, far more than 90% of the time, I'm on a trajectory that's in alignment with my goals and values.
For people who are watching and saying, I feel like I want to change my life, but I don't know where to start, or maybe I haven't had such a strong, intense feeling to begin my journey. What did it feel like for you?
It was intense because an existential crisis is essentially when your sense of self comes into question. It's shocking, but it also provides an opportunity for reinvention. At the time, it felt painful and it was something that I did not want to experience. But in retrospect, it provided me with an opportunity to change my life and my career for the better. And I realized how oblivious I was to how my mind operated, why I did certain things, why I said certain things. And I also realized that I wasn't in control of many of the resources in my life, my physical energy, my attention, many of my skills, my finances, and that adversely affected most aspects of my life, even though there were many positive things happening for me.
And so when you came to this moment, when you realized, I'm not living my life in the best way that I can, I know you mentioned journaling and meditation. Do you want to kind of conceptualize what that might look like for people who are interested in accessing those tools that are really available for everyone?
Prior to 2014, I was meditating very sparsely, maybe once a week, maybe once a month, and it was very uncomfortable. I lacked the physical mobility to sit cross-legged or to even sit down for extended periods of time. So it was physically uncomfortable to meditate. And then facing myself, facing my fears and insecurities, which tend to come up during meditation, was scary to me. So I would procrastinate significantly. And eventually I started meditating a minute per day. And then eventually I would increase it to a couple of minutes per day. And then I started joining different communities in Toronto, like the Consciousness Explorers Club, and learned how to meditate for longer. Within the first couple of years, I went from being afraid of meditating for a minute or two to regularly meditating for an hour or two, at least twice a week, and then supplementing that with daily meditation sessions of up to half an hour a day. I got rid of many past relationships and environments that I would frequent. So for example, prior to 2014, I would be in nightclubs frequently. I stopped going to nightclubs, so I had extra time. I stopped drinking alcohol, so I had extra time. I stopped hanging out with the vast majority of people that I was hanging out with, so I had extra time, and I filled that time with meditation, different forms of yoga, journaling, etc. And it completely changed my life for the better.
If I'm someone who is noticing that, my life is not reflecting where I want to be, how would I open up a book and do I just start writing, or what did that look like for you?
So bullet journaling is when you're basically writing down bullet points related to topics that are relevant to you in the moment. That's a short form version of journaling. Then there's long form versions of journaling where you're addressing similar topics, but writing lengthy paragraphs. And another form of journaling that's been hugely beneficial to me has been gratitude journaling. Every day since probably 2015, I've written down 3 things that I'm grateful for, and most importantly, why I'm grateful for them. There's a lot of research on how gratitude journaling and reinforcing gratitude on a daily basis improves one's mental health and well-being. But also, since I've been accumulating this massive list of things that I'm grateful for, it has mitigated my spending. I don't spend as mindlessly anymore because I have so many things in my life that I'm grateful for.
That you feel fulfilled by.
This journey has taught me that there are so many non-material things in my life that I'm grateful for, and accumulating more material objects and financial wealth may not necessarily increase my levels of fulfillment and well-being.
Once you're very rooted in who you are and the things that you know that are really important to you, everything else just kind of falls in place, and you can be more aware of recognizing when you're going outside of your core values or your boundaries that you've kind of set for yourself. And so knowing those is really important and really helps you rein it in sometimes on the decisions that you might make. I actually just want to talk about your professional journey right now. Like, you're a photographer, you have your own production company. You've gone through kind of a learning journey with that, as well as you're running your own business, and you have been mindful of maybe things that you were doing in the past that weren't necessarily serving you.
I was perpetually seeking external validation and putting the needs of others above my own needs. So I would basically be operating from a place of lacking in fulfillment, but helping others become fulfilled as a way of getting validation from them. That manifested in my business through underpricing and under-earning. So running my production company, I would make sure that my contractors were straight, that they would get paid what they wanted to get paid. I would over-deliver when it came to my clients, but I would end up being burnt out, underpaid, and I was essentially giving myself the short end of the stick without consciously being aware of it. And part of the reason for that was because I unconsciously thought I deserved the pain that I would experience in these dynamics. I still exceed expectations when it comes to working with my colleagues, clients, and mentors. But now, most of the time, I ensure that my needs are met first, and I ensure that I'm not underpricing myself. If I undermine myself in any ways, psychologically, financially, within a professional dynamic, that can lead to resentment on my part.
Right.
And just practically, I can't grow my business that way.
Yeah. Something really interesting that you also mentioned was that, you had to shift your friendships. And that can be a really tough thing for, a young person, any person really, to navigate. How were you able to kind of get through that experience?
This is how emotions can be adaptive, even negative emotions. If you feel an overabundance of negative emotions, they can compel you to change in ways that you were not able to when those strong emotions were not present to the same degree. And I knew that spending time with certain people and spending time in certain environments would simply reinforce the habits and thought patterns that were causing me to suffer, and were reinforcing the sense of self that was causing me to suffer. And of course, my sense of self was intertwined with many of those relationships as well.
Right.
So it was challenging, but now that I've either distanced myself from certain people and environments or have cut them off altogether, the relationships that I have cultivated have been amazing and have been in complete alignment with my goals and values.
How were you able to find kind of your new mentors and like your new friends? Was it a lot of searching, or like what were the steps that you took?
Reading a blog or a book, and I would reach out, send a cold email to the author.
Yeah.
Or I would use Facebook or sites like meetup.com or Eventbrite to find events that were in alignment with my new values and my new goals. So I'd find yoga communities, yoga meetups, meditation meetups, meetups pertaining to personal development, meetups pertaining to introspection. Slowly but surely I was meeting leaders and other people that were defining the person that I wanted to be.
Something that I wanted to ask you about was the importance of emotional intelligence and financial intelligence intertwined. So how have you been able to intertwine that in your everyday life, and what are some kind of points that you would tell your younger self or our audience?
It's very challenging to stick to a game plan financially when your emotions are not regulated and when you're lacking in self-awareness. You're more prone to impulsivity or deviating from whatever budget you've established for yourself or whatever goals or values you've established for yourself. Without mindfulness, there's no emotional intelligence. And without emotional intelligence, there's no effective management or understanding of finances. On top of that, to cultivate financial intelligence or financial literacy requires education, whether that's formal education or reading on a daily basis or weekly basis, or watching different videos, or acquiring knowledge through mentors.
And I know that for a lot of people, your upbringing has a lot to do with how you view money. Some people's families talk a lot about money. Some people's families do not talk a lot about money, or sometimes money is scarce.
Your family of origin has a profound impact on how you understand money and your relationship to money and how you manage your finances. Your family of origin also impacts every other aspect of your life.
Totally.
And all of your relationships and your sense of self.
Yeah.
I came from a middle class household and I grew up in the North York part of Toronto, and money wasn't discussed in our household for the most part. And when it was usually from a place of lack, like we don't have enough for this. So there's a lot of limitations put in place unconsciously in relation to my relationship to money, my earning potential, and so on and so forth. So basically, if you have unprocessed trauma, if you haven't truly transcended the household income of the household that you grew up with, you'll revert back to the household income of the household that you grew up with, no matter how much money you make.
Right.
So MC Hammer, even though he was the equivalent of Drake in the early 90s, he also had the largest entourage in hip hop history, I believe. And he ended up paying all of these people around him, even if they added very little value to his life, to the point that he went from being a multimillionaire to bankrupt.
Right.
He got rid of all of his money because at an unconscious level, he did not feel deserving of it. And he felt that he had to take care of all of these people, even though they were not reciprocating much at all.
The idea of money can be really traumatic, especially when you're coming from a place of not having enough. But what I think is really important to highlight, especially in your case and in the cases of so many people, is that despite your family of origin, where you're from, how money was discussed, if it wasn't discussed, there's always an opportunity to learn, and you've found mentors and you've even self-educated. But I think it's really important to let people know that they can do that. And I know you brought some stuff today. Some
yeah,
books,
these are some books on mindfulness. This is the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the books from the Vedas, which are the books that define and discuss the nature of mindfulness and yoga. So I think this is a great book to understand what mindfulness is. Be Here Now is another amazing book by Ram Dass. For Western audiences, it's one of the most clear books on the nature of mindfulness and different forms of yoga and meditation. And then this is Modern Man in Search of a Soul, which is by Carl Jung, which also discusses a lot of these topics and the nature of trauma in individuals and in terms of the collective consciousness of humanity. And some books that have been helpful to me in terms of learning about personal finance have been Millionaire Teacher by Andrew Hallam, I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, You Are a Badass at Making Money by Jen Sincero, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Those have completely changed my life for the better.
What are some of those barriers to emotional intelligence?
Being in an environment that's not conducive to your goals and values, or that's not conducive to the cultivation of introspection and knowledge of self, will be a barrier to emotional intelligence. I was teaching a workshop on emotional intelligence for creatives through Artscape, and I discussed Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs are the most basic needs like food and shelter. At the very top is self-actualization at the very top of this pyramid. Self-actualization being the highest form of human potential. Without addressing the needs associated with the lowest points of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's not possible to self-actualize. If you're hungry on a daily basis, if you don't have enough money to cover your bills on a daily basis, if you're homeless, it'll be very hard for you to work towards self-actualization or to manage your finances effectively because you're gonna be in a state of fight, flight, or freeze. So basically, individuals that experience chronic stress or unprocessed trauma, what happens is their prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain that's in charge of executive functioning and rational thought and decision making, it becomes hindered, it becomes shrunken. And the amygdala, the fight, flight, freeze part of the brain becomes over-reliant on it. The gray matter in that part of the brain becomes more robust. So if your fight, flight, freeze part of the brain is more dominant, you're more prone to impulsivity and lashing out and not acting from a place of reason. And that's when you're gonna be making poor financial decisions. And worst of all, that's when you're gonna be making poor decisions in your relationships.
Right.
So you might compromise your work relationships, which you need to make money.
Let's talk a little bit about what money means to you. How do you define money?
To me, money is a symbol for trust, for value, for attention, and for potential. Money is also a symbol for energy, the exchange of energy. So to acquire money requires energy, to generate income requires energy. So money is all of these things. It can also be an oversimplification of an individual's value as a human being. I think that's an illusion that a lot of people buy into when it comes to money. The assumption that someone with a lot of money is necessarily valuable to themselves and society at large, or that they're a quote-unquote good person, which is not true. There are many, many things that are more important than money, and that money is a means to an end. Health is far more important than money. Meaningful relationships are far more important than money. And going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self-actualization, the fulfillment of one's highest purpose, the fulfillment of one's creative potential is far more important than money. Money can be used to reinforce all of these things, but money on its own is not as valuable as what I mentioned.
How has your perception of money kind of evolved? When I was younger, I just perceived people who had money to be like successful, good people, rational, and just like put them on a pedestal. But you know, as you get older, you recognize that that's not always the case. How has that evolved for you?
Yeah, I did not put much thought into my relationship to money prior to that existential crisis in 2014. And like yourself, when I was a kid, I used to put people that were seemingly wealthy on a pedestal. And I would basically look at what I assumed to be their financial wealth and assume that they were wealthy and fulfilled in other ways. And now that I'm older, I realize that that's not necessarily the case at all. As I've gotten older, I've realized that there are many people in the society that we live in that are essentially high-functioning addicts who spend enormous amounts of capital on different forms of addiction or soothing themselves in maladaptive ways. Maladaptive behaviors are behaviors that are not appropriate to the present moment or are reminiscent of past traumas, and they're behaviors that are not conducive to one's goals and values. So they're behaviors that create conditions that one does not want. So surrounding yourself with people that have achieved your financial goals and other goals is very important. Jim Rohn, who is one of the founding fathers of personal development, he once said that you're the average of the 5 people that you surround yourself with. So once you go through the process of introspection as a young person, using some of the tools to cultivate emotional intelligence that I described, like journaling and meditation, from that point, you'll have your goals and values written down. And then as you surround yourself with people that align with those goals and values, it's incredible how your life will start to change to be in alignment with those goals and values almost automatically. If you have obvious financial constraints, it's very important to seek mentorship, either through books or different blogs that are available online. There are usually free services in most major cities that can mentor and coach youth on financial literacy and topics of that nature. You know, for young people, when reaching out to potential mentors, definitely try to bring value to them. How can I help this person out? Do they need an intern? Do they need someone to get coffee at their office on a particular day? Anything that you can do to add value to the life of someone that you want to learn from will put you at a huge advantage, because the individuals that are most knowledgeable when it comes to finance and many other topics, they basically have many people emailing and calling them and asking them for things. You can set yourself apart by offering something and then learning from them in the process by simply spending time with them. And then they'll just freely give you information.
What are some of the things that you've learned about your own personal finance? Compound
interest is one of the most powerful forces in the society that we live in, and it can work for or against someone. When you invest in the stock market through index funds, for example, you have a $100 principal that you invest in, and then it appreciates on average at a rate of 6% a year. So after the first year, your $100 investment becomes 106, and then 6% is added onto that the following year, and the snowball gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and presumably you're getting closer and closer to your financial goals. Inflation has to be factored into most financial decisions as well. Putting your money in a savings account, a typical savings account, or even a high interest savings account, doesn't allow for your money to appreciate at a pace that's greater than inflation. So in that sense, investing in things like index funds or real estate are better for long-term investments, whereas savings accounts are best for short-term investments like saving for a trip or purchasing a car. You know, my parents, in addition to not talking much about money, to this day, they both have one source of income. And I think that the 2008 recession has shown how dangerous that is.
I agree.
To only have one source of income is basically putting yourself in one basket. It's also very important to diversify your relationships and your sources of knowledge, because you'll be able to learn things from those relationships and those sources of knowledge that can potentially benefit you financially, intellectually, and in terms of your highest purpose, or in terms of self-actualization.
This has been an amazing conversation. I'm so happy that you could join us today and that you could share your experiences. And I know that I've learned a lot, and I know that everyone who's watching will learn a lot as well. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.